Okay, um, so before we start the demo, I'm going to go over our pigments. This is our full palette. We have titanium white, cad lemon, yellow ochre, alizarin, crimson, transparent oxide red, or burnt sienna, cad red. This is optional, sap green, ultramarine blue, King's blue is also optional, and last one is burnt sienna, burnt umber. So this is our full palette. So as you can see, this is a very simple constructed drawing that I have sprayed and it's fixed to the canvas. Obviously in class, you can draw with pencil, and then either with a pen, fine point pen, you can trace your lines to get the drawing accurate. Once the drawing is, it doesn't have to be perfect, but more or less accurate, you'll see I've annotated some of just the main planes of the head. In general, it's a very simplified drawing of the model. So the first thing I want to do is stain my canvas. And to do that, I'm just using my OMS jar here, and I'll stain it with a little bit of burnt umber. So grab a little bit of burnt umber here, and then I'm going to use like a bigger brush for this. I'll dip it in, and I want this to mostly be OMS so I can wipe it down. So as you see, when I wipe it on the canvas, I'm just going to be really bold wiping this on, and I'm just trying to get a neutral ground color that's not white. And so burnt umber does a really good job of doing this, staining the canvas. And the reason I'm staining the canvas is because when you paint on pure white surface, some of the hues or values are hard to judge because the ground is so light. So if you were to put in like a middle value of 5, it might look like more like a 7 value against the white, harsh white. So once I have a first layer down here, I'm going to rip a little bit of my rag and just kind of do some small circles and really blend that into the canvas, kind of push it in. Just so it's not so, wet. So as you can see, it's toned the canvas, and it's better than white. What I could do is stain it again, do the same thing, get some more pigment on my brush, and stain it just a little bit darker. Sometimes you start to lose the drawing when you do this, so just be very careful. If you haven't sprayed it with a fixative, or if you haven't put pen, I did like one quick layer of spray because I ran out of my workable fixative. But I'm just going to be cautious to not try to lose the drawing. Of course, you can always refine the drawing. You're always drawing. You're never not drawing when you're painting from life, from photo. So in this demo, it's going to be primarily what we'll be doing in class, which is Alla Prima painting, which just means wet on wet. So, we have generally 4 to 5 hours of painting time in our class. And hopefully by the end of this demo, you'll be able to see what I can get done in much less time. Okay, so we've stained the canvas. we can still kind of see the drawing. Now the first thing I want to do is actually block in sort of the background area. You can see in the reference photo, it's this kind of bluish hue. And the reason I want to do that is because the more I mix colors that relate to the background, I'll have an easier time mixing those sort of facial values and tones. Whereas if I was trying to mix these from a background that wasn't a ballpark value and tone of the actual reference, it might not be as accurate. So I'm going to go ahead and mix I think is close enough to a background value. So I'm starting off at ultramarine, a little bit of King's, and I'm going to neutralize the blue with actually a little bit of transparent oxide red, which kind of gives a really nice orangey tint. Okay, so let's see if that's working out. I think it's close enough in terms of value. So I'm going to get that also layered on now. And in these beginning stages, I'm really trying to keep my paint very thin. I don't want to cake on paint right now. Just trying to kind of, in some ways I'm kind of restaining the canvas, at least the background now, except this time I'm not going to wipe it, but kind of just getting a general value scale. And if you see my hand over here moving, it's because my iPad's right here. I'm kind of looking at the iPad as I'm painting, and sometimes it locks or the screen goes dim. Okay, so it's still very thin layers, but I really want to block this in, this background. And sometimes when we're painting, especially in a classroom setting, sometimes we neglect the background. It becomes like it's an afterthought, and I want to make sure that it's not an afterthought here. It's kind of almost like a due diligence. You just want to cover the canvas and make sure that there's, a nice tone that you're seeing, that you're looking at. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to mix kind of a really basic, like 3 or 4 tones and values. Skin tones of the face, so I can just get a general idea of where the values live. So maybe a shadow color might live in not far away from just pure burnt umber here. But I might I love transparent oxide red for skin tones. It's very high tinting strength. And the shadows, especially the shadows, I want to try to keep them translucent as much as possible. I might lighten this just a little bit, maybe with some ochre. Okay, so now it's looking very, very orange on my palette, but I can neutralize it a little bit with its complementary, which is blue, just a little bit of ultramarine to darken that up. And maybe we'll start with this as a darkest dark in terms of shadow for the face. And now I want to mix a step up from this. So I will grab some more transparent oxide red, and I will bring a little bit of white into this mix. Sometimes you get a really nice starting point with just titanium white and transparent oxide red. So I'm going to add a little bit more white to this mixture. And I see a lot of kind of these duller greens in the face as well. So I'm going to try to neutralize this a little bit with sap green and a little bit of King's Blue. The reason I really love and encourage you to use King's Blue is because it's a really great pigment that neutralizes skin tones without dropping the value significantly. So like the ultramarine blue kind of has a strong tint and it's really dark. So when you mix it in, it can tend to drop the value significantly of whatever you're mixing. And so King's Blue is already kind of a lighter value, and so you don't get that loss of tone as quickly. Okay, so maybe this is looking for a shadow tone, kind of a darker mid-tone, and then a light to kind of get me started. And I think we can maybe get a little bit lighter here. We can mix kind of a warmer mid-tone as well. Taking from this, I see a lot of pinks in the model's face as well, so I might add a little bit of alizarin crimson to this mixture as it lightens up. So these are basically the same, very close in value right now. So what I can do is continue to lighten this a little bit. Okay. And now I'm going to mix a lighter tone as well. So kind of have four values to jump off of. And what I'll do is I'll actually just grab from this pigment here from the edge and just add a little bit more white to it. Okay, looks like we have four values here for shadows, darker midtones, and a light here. Definitely not highlight. I'm not really concerned with highlights, but I do want to make sure that there's kind of a nice value range just to get started and lay things out. So I'm going to start with my darkest darks, which is generally my shadow colors. And I really want to exercise the squinting game here. You don't want to look at details. You kind of just want to squint at the model and really try to lay down the main planes, shadow planes, and shadow shapes. So I'm going to dip in my medium here. I'll start with this shadow tone here. And the first main shadow I see is kind of under the chin here. And again, this paint application is very thin, okay? Very light, so you should still be able to kind of see under the into the canvas here. here. As I'm doing this, I'm really trying not to focus on any detail. So just trying to, I keep squinting at the reference and just really trying to see the model as just a series of shadow shapes as much as possible. And then you find the bottom lip by articulating the cast shadow under that bottom lip. So don't try to paint the lip itself, paint the shadow shape underneath it. And then I'm just going to really simply block in the eye sockets. Just a really light, still very translucent, a light shadow color here. And what this does, by blocking it in, blocking in just the eye sockets, forgetting about the eyebrows, the eye itself, the pupil, all that stuff, forget about it. But just by blocking in the eye sockets, you start to see sort of the essence of the model. Their features really come to life, and you can make adjustments accordingly, to your drawing. And I'm still really just trying to see some main shadow shapes. See, there's a cheekbone here. What I'm going to do is slightly darken this next shadow, just because it does cool up over here on this side. Again, it's not really a detail, it's just something that I'm seeing and I'm reacting to quickly, just because I don't want to, the whole point of this is to kind of abbreviate what I'm seeing and take kind of annotations of the larger shadow shapes. And so I just wanted to make a note of this visual distinction between this shadow here and this shadow here. Because all of this is in shadow. And then obviously I don't want to neglect the hair. The hair is kind of, one of the darkest features as well in this reference photo. So I'm going to mix a darker value for the hair, which is just my shadow color here, and I'm just kind of like slowly dragging in a little bit more ultramarine blue to darken it. So it darkens it and neutralizes it simultaneously. And so let's see, there's a big portion of the hair that's in shadow here. It's like the darkest dark kind of is in this area here. And you'll probably keep hearing me remind you and remind myself that I'm keeping the paint very thin at this point. Because often what happens when you're painting from life, you're on a time crunch, but what happens when you take on the paint, it tends to flatten the space, and so you don't want shadows to read as flat. You want to see kind of depth into them, and how you describe depth, generally speaking, with oil paint is translucency. The other thing is sometimes, this is my first take of the portrait here, my initial thoughts of how I'm seeing it. And the chances are most of this will change throughout the process of the painting. But often what I find happens is when you block in some of the shadows like this, some of them you don't even touch, especially in an Alla Prima setting, because you want to make really intentional decisions when you're painting Alla Prima, because you don't have all the time in the world. There's just simply not enough time. And so we in an Alla Prima setting, we want to try to just, get an abbreviated version of the model, try to capture their essence. And you really don't need a lot of detail to get their essence. Sometimes what I do, maybe you'll see this, but I just want to call it out. Sometimes if I mix a value that I see elsewhere in the portrait, I'll go ahead and block that in. So I notice that this value here that I just mixed is similar to the eyebrow values here. So not a lot of detail on the eyes. I just want to make sure I have kind of a general blocking. Okay. Maybe I can block in the shirt because it is a prominent kind of brown color that's similar. I'm sure, this will change as well, but just to have it blocked in really quickly. Okay, now I think I'm ready to move on to not exactly a shadow color, but maybe the next mid-tone here. Good dip in the medium. I'm gonna kind of just like sprinkle this around where I see not exactly shadows, but close to shadow tone. And now as I'm putting this down, I'm kind of realizing that maybe it's not, might not be light enough, but let's see. There's also a little bit more pink. So not that these tones have to be perfect right now, but I do want to get my first impression of the portrait down as quickly as possible here. Yeah, so look, this and this are basically the same value. So that means this is probably too dark or my shadow is too dark. And at this point, I think it's probably a combination of both, actually. I'm going to go ahead and darken the shadow just a bit more. Okay, so now I'm going to be pretty liberal with this this tone here, because again, I'm still trying to keep it very simple in terms of a main shadow tone, a mid-tone, and a light tone. So I'm just sprinkling this around. Again, this will all be altered later, but it's just kind of to get me started on covering the canvas. Okay, I'm going to move to a lighter midtone now, which on my palette is right here. And block in not exactly the lights, but just the lighter midtones. And with oil paints, you always have to build up to the lights. So sometimes you'll put down a value that you feel is accurate and true. It's specifically a lighter value, and then what ends up happening later is the paint kind of soaks into the canvas and it gets darker as your painting continues. And so it's just the nature of the pigments. So just be mindful of that you're going to have to build up to your lights. So as I move on to even a lighter light here, I'm aware that I'll probably end up lightening this value as well. So I'm still in the squinting mode. I'm doing a lot of squinting on the portrait just to kind of move my way around and really get this blocked in as quickly as possible. I often call this phase the ugly phase of the painting. And now this is becoming kind of a sore eye here, so I'm going to go back, darker value here. Just cover it up a little bit. And now I'm noticing that the surround space needs to be darker, which maybe that's going to happen. So let's darken that a bit more. I'll refine the darks just a little bit more around here. Again, you're always drawing, you're stock drawing when you're Alla Prima painting. Always have to renegotiate your reference points, things that you thought maybe were accurate at first, maybe weren't as accurate as as the painting develops. You realize, oh, you know what, that was actually off. That's okay. I mean, it's the battle of painting. It's always kind of this wrestling match or negotiation. Okay. So I might just really quickly block in, the areas that I missed. The lip, the bottom lip here. General value. And so this is what So this is what I would call, a block-in. If you can get to this point, this is a very helpful point to get to in the Alla Prima painting process, because you start to see kind of the essence of the model without even putting any detail. There's just, what is there, 5 or 6 values at this point on the model here, that you can then begin to refine after you get to this point. Okay, so post block-in, what I want to kind of focus on is refining some features, and how I do that is first reestablishing the shadow shapes, the darkest darks. So I'm going to focus on darkening some of the darks, not only on the portrait but the surround space, darkening some of the darks, and then lightening some of the lights, right? Because the first block-in was just a kind of a guesstimation of really simple. And you'll see on my palette I just mixed some more darks here, the background, and then I mixed some more lights and some variation of mid-tones. So I'd encourage you to spend some time mixing paint, and mix more than you think. I think most students tend to use less paint than they should be using, which ends up resulting in a lot of other issues. Oh, and I should point out the brushes I'm using right now. For the block-in, I just used this little Filbert number 2. It's a good kind of drawing brush. These are all hog hair bristles. And then for some of the refining, I'm just going to use some of these long flats from Trekell. This is a 2 and a 4. I also will probably use this round number 4 as well. But generally speaking, brushes are like, use what you have. I like to have kind of a brush for the darkest darks, a brush for midtones, and a brush for the lights. So at least 3 while I'm painting, so they don't get all muddy. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start darkening some of the darks. I think I'm going to use a small flat for that, for those darks. So the first dark I see here is actually in the surround space here. And again, still keeping my paints pretty thin here. I don't want them to get too thick, which again tends to flatten the space a bit more if it's like an opaque, dark layer of paint. So it's still pretty thin, kind of carving out the negative space of the portrait here. So even doing that will make a big difference. There's also some one other thing I want to kind of pay attention to, the surround space. Try to make a decision. Usually the light logic will dictate where this is, but kind of make a decision on which side of the background is lighter. So it might look like one value, but to give the illusion of space, often we have to over-exaggerate that. So in this case, I feel like this side is maybe a bit lighter, like maybe the light source is kind of coming more towards this way and then diffusing more over here. So I'm going to just take a mental note of that and make this area maybe a bit lighter, and then just dramatically, maybe not dramatically, but darken this in relation to this. Because right now this is looking more dark. And I think I'm going to darken this a bit more. So I'm going to go back into my shadow, my initial background color here, and just add a little bit more this dark mixture that I mixed here. And kind of darken this up just a bit more. Again, it always helps to take breaks in the middle of your painting. When the model is breaking, you should be breaking. Like rest your eyes. Don't overanalyze your painting. Just take a break. Come back. See what needs to be lighter, what needs to be darker. Okay, so that, I could also come back to this later, but I just wanted to really quickly darken this side and maybe lighten this side up just a bit more. Yeah, there's still some areas in the hair that I feel could be much darker. So I'm just gonna, and the portrait's not about the hair, but again, refining the block in means just going back in, and the first thing I do is darken the darks, like I said. That tends to give a little bit more realized version of the portrait. I like to keep the edges of the hair really nice and soft. And so that's kind of a oil painting rule of thumb. Just something good to kind of live by is when you're softening an edge, it usually means you need both the edge of the hair and the edge of the background or surround space to be wet so that they can kind of merge into one another. Or I like to use the term marry one another. The edges kind of butt up against each other and marry one another. This whole shadow color is a bit dark, so let's keep going. Let's keep playing that darken darks game here without overthinking it, right? I'm gonna try to stay away from the details, the features. I still think there's a lot I could, re-render just the planes of the face in terms of values. So that's what I'm going to do next. And I have this long kind of flat that I really like using specifically for this. So again, if I see a value that I put down and I see it maybe somewhere else on the face, like as I'm looking at this, maybe it also comes down over here and this transitional value here under the chin. And actually, before I keep going, I think I need to address some of these other midtones and lights, which I think are just too dark. So, which I told you before that you have to build up to the lights. So when I'm looking at this was too dark, so I'm gonna put a new mixture of paint on top of it to effectively lighten but also simplify the forehead into like 3 planes. So, this plane over here. Now this plane has to get lighter. So I'm going to use a new brush for that. I generally try not to blend on the canvas if I can help it. When you overblend, your painting just turns to mud, and you lose those really bright hues that you mixed. So just be mindful of that. Try to make every brush stroke, as hard as it is, try to make every brush stroke intentional to some degree, so that you're not over mixing, over blending. So as I lighten some of these skin tones surrounding, you like the torso, you can see that the shadows begin to appear darker. Everything is relative in oil painting, so when you put down a color, it only looks or appears to be that color because of what's next to it, which is a weird kind of concept to wrap your head around. But when you mix a color and put it on the white canvas, it just looks jarring because that color is relating itself to a very bright background. So just be mindful of that. So now I'm trying to mix these kind of in-between tones or values of the kind of this highlighted area, and as the plane of the face turns, I have to mix these in-between values so it's not so intense. So the transition is not so intense, I should say. There we go. So now we start to see form. So now this is kind of sticking out, right? I need to find a transitional value for that. It's too light. Let's keep going a little bit darker. Let's see what this gives us. I think that did it. Okay. So now we're starting to see the form be articulated just a little bit more. And let's keep refining it a little bit. I don't want to lose the kind of rosiness of the cheek. So alizarin's really good at kind of giving that rosy because it's translucent and its tinting strength is really high. So it gives you a really nice natural pink mix of the skin tone. So I can see that over here. Maybe not dark enough. Let's keep darkening it just a bit more. Let's see if this does it. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, so now I'm paying attention to how warm this is. This kind of bends towards, pinkish. Then as it comes down here in this shadow area, it really gets cool. So I'm going to use like the complementary of this like pinkish hue and give it more of a kind of a greener hue in this region. And not to over exaggerate, I don't want to over exaggerate it, but just to give the painting a little bit more kind of color harmony. So let's see if we put some green. I'm going to use just a little bit of sap green to this dark mid-tone mixture and see what this gives me. Yeah, so that's what I'm looking for. It's super subtle, but make sure, I think the value needs to be darker. So let's go a little bit more dark. So seldom do I actually paint the nostril, especially in an Alla Prima painting. You want to just paint the underplane of the nose. That gives you plenty of information. Your eye will connect the rest of the dots. And notice that it does get a bit warmer under the nose here. If you find your brushes or your colors are getting muddy, it's a good sign to just dip your brushes, clean them real quickly, just in OMS. Okay, so now I think I can start kind of going in and I'm continuing to make refinements, but I think the eyes have been a little neglected this whole time. I think there's still a little bit more I could do on the nose to help it look like a nose. I should also say that in Alla Prima painting, generally try to focus on one eye. You don't have to You don't have to paint both eyes. Usually, in painting, your eye goes to, it favors one of the eyes in the portrait. So, I would say spend more time focusing your energy on one eye rather than both of the eyes. Um, So notice this stark contrast here between this plane and this plane. So means we need to mix a transitional value here. So something that just kind of seamlessly merges these planes together. So I'm going to start ever so slightly articulating the eyes now. So notice how long it took me to get to this point before I started painting the eyes. And hopefully you'll see how little attention or how much little paint you actually have to, or information you have to put down to get the eyes looking like an eye. It's a game of simplification. Again, like the eye sockets and the location of the eyes are kind of the main thing. If you have that, it's hard to go wrong. That's why you need to redraw. So I'm trying to be very intentional about these strokes in the eye because they're really tiny strokes. And B, I don't want to overthink the eyes. Okay. One thing about this model's eyes is they're tonally, almost exactly the same as the background. So I think it's going to bring. I can actually use the background mixture for the eyes. Let's see what that does. Hopefully it brings kind of a cohesion to the entire portrait. Like that. I'm not going to overwork it, but I think just seeing that and seeing it kind of reverberate from the background is actually really nice, I think. Also notice how very little I'll kind of address the whites of the eyes. Because generally speaking, the whites of the eyes are the same color or same value as your midtone. So I rarely put white in the eyes. In this case, I think I'm going to just focus on this eye primarily for this painting. I think I'll give, just a little bit more information to this eye here, but generally speaking, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. And then for the white of this eye, because it's so prominent, this eye here, it's going to be this like really neutral gray, you'll see. Almost the same color as or I'm taking from the background. And just brightening it up ever so slightly. Okay, so sorry about that. My camera battery died, but we're back. And I'm gonna try to spend just maybe around 20 more minutes on this to finish up the Alla Prima portrait. So what I've done is I've wiped all my colors and just started mixing it. I noticed that some of my colors were getting quite muddy, so I just remixed a bunch of colors, warmer and cooler colors, and some shadow colors again. So let's get started. And I am going to be moving to sort of smaller brushes now because most of the portrait has been realized. Now I'm still honing in on the details now. And still will probably alter the drawing to some degree as I keep painting, but for the most part I'm just going to kind of focus on refinement from here on out. So things I'm looking for right now are kind of how edges are looking, hard edges or soft edges. Some of my values are incorrect. I want to make sure that the form of the head reads volumetric as it's turning, and I'm noticing there's some of an issue here and some of an issue here, so I'm going to address some of these as I go. Okay, so let's start here. going in to soften this edge, the hairline. If you don't soften the edge of the hairline, usually it really sticks out like a sore thumb. So the hairline in general should be pretty soft. And often you have to mix these in-between values. It's not as easy as just blending a dry brush against your pigments. You have to mix the in-between values. I'm going to remix some of the background color as well, just kind of real quickly. Ballpark. So I could actually draw with that background color as well. Kind of outline the face. Again, refining some of the shadows, darkening the darks. In some areas that's too dark. And we lost a little bit of lip there, so let's kind of add that back in. So I just want to reiterate that during, class time we're always racing against the clock. So, sometimes you'll get ahead of the game, and you'll have more time to render, but oftentimes you won't. So try to give yourself a goal. Maybe today I want to make sure that I want to focus on the block. I want to get the block in right. So you spend most of your time on the block in. Or maybe it's, hey, I really want to focus on the eyes because I always neglect them. And maybe this is the class session where I really try to focus on the eyes. It's always helpful to give yourself some kind of goal, because very rarely will you be able to fully resolve a painting during the class time. But if you set a goal, a very specific goal, you'll have time to generally you'll have time to meet that goal. Just kind of relieve yourself from the notion of quote-unquote finishing a painting. These are exercises. It's like just going to the gym or whatever you do. Not every painting session is a home run. In fact, most of them are not home runs. Sometimes they are. I'm personally most bothered by a portrait if there's something off with the eyes. So that's probably why you'll see my natural tendency is to kind of revisit the eyes just to make sure they're not distracting, because if they're distracting, then it really screws up your whole painting. It's hard to move past a portrait where the eyes are a little messed up. So as long as they're not overly distracting, that's kind of what I'm going for. Not perfection. Nothing close to perfection. But and as I say that, I want to, be mindful. I don't want to hone in on one thing and spend, 30 minutes on just one feature or something. I'm constantly ideally, I'd be constantly moving around the portrait and seeing the larger picture. Because if you get fixated on one feature, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Because you're failing to see the big picture, quite literally. So, just being mindful of that. I'm going to kind of distract myself a little bit, not get so fixated on the face right now, and I'm going to move towards just resolving a little bit of the clothing, the model, and then I can revisit the face if there's time. But I personally know I will be a little bothered if I don't really address the attire here, and I run out of time. So I know Okay, I don't want to get too carried away with the clothes, but I just want to make sure that they are described enough that there is some sense of volume, form happening. Okay. Maybe I'll revisit that if there's just enough time, but I don't really see it as a priority. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't completely neglected. Okay, here's the final painting. By no means is it finished, but that was never really the point of the demo. I just wanted to show what you could potentially resolve in a class setting, in an Alla Prima class setting. So obviously you can go back and re-watch whatever you need to, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you in class.